Coming up, some major injuries for Alabama and a major accomplishment for Georgia. Just don't tell that to Kirby Smart. We'll talk about it all next, right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to a very busy edition of AT&T SEC Country Live today. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johns. We're glad to have you with us. A lot coming up for us today. 40 minutes after the hour, we'll say hello to Alex Hickey, who covers the LSU Tigers for SECCountry.com. A little less than 20 minutes from now, we'll talk to Mark Burnett, who covers the Alabama Crimson Tide for SECCountry.com. Those two teams played a big game on Saturday. You were there for that. We'll talk a lot about that today, as well as Georgia winning the East, more problems for Florida. Tennessee, I guess, holds on for victory against Southern Miss. We got a lot to do today.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy games. I mean, look at Florida, Missouri, look at obviously Georgia, South Carolina, Bama, LSU. A lot to talk about today.
Before any of that, though, let me remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV. They will help you stay connected all season long. And speaking of AT&T, let's dive in here with our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Item number 1 on the list. We mentioned Alabama gets a win against LSU on Saturday, 24-10 the final score, but the final outcome, well, the reverberations from that may last for quite some time, because it was potentially a costly game for the Crimson Tide with injuries to Mack Wilson, injuries to Shaun Dion Hamilton. Their season is over, and today when Nick Saban met with the media as kind of an aftermath of the game against LSU, he talked about those injuries and a few more nicks and bruises for the Crimson Tide.
You know, Shaun Dion had a successful surgery, and this is something that he'll be able to respond to in a few months and hopefully be able to come back and have an opportunity to do some things to extend his career. Mack had a foot injury that will probably put him out 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. You know, we'll just have to play it by ear and see how fast it heals. So we got some other guys that are nicked up that may not practice today, but we think they'll be ready to go tomorrow and be able to do enough to be ready to play in the game.
So you hear Nick Saban talking about those injuries there, and speaking of Shaun Dion Hamilton, he also put a photo out on social media of himself giving a little bit of a thumbs up here, letting Alabama fans know that he's in good spirits after his surgery. See the phrasing there that the surgery was good, but is the news good here for Alabama? Obviously it's not, because in addition to Wilson and Shaun Dion Hamilton, a couple star linebackers, Minkah Fitzpatrick also leaves this game with an injury as well. That's one of the guys that I believe that Saban's referencing when he says not practicing today. That's 3 pretty big names of this Alabama defense, not on the practice field here on this Monday. In the case of Wilson and Shaun Dion Hamilton, not going to be available for at least the rest of the regular season, and may not even available for the college football playoffs either. I mean, how big of a setback is this for Alabama, given the fact that you also had some linebacker injuries after the Florida State game too?
Yeah, it's a huge deal. And when you look at how Alabama played after the Shaun Dion Hamilton injury last year against Florida, and just tough news for that guy. I mean, that's a senior that comes back from an ACL injury and obviously frustrated on the field. I was sitting right there when he threw his helmet and kind of threw it down. He was in tears leaving the field. So bad look for him, obviously. Alabama moving on, I think it's a big deal for them when you look down the stretch. I mean, they needed Shaun Dion Hamilton on the field. I mean, he's one of their best players. You're looking at a guy who's been player of the week a bunch of times this year, one of the leaders of the defense at that linebacking position. They just couldn't afford to have any more losses at the linebackers. They actually had to burn a red shirt on Saturday night. Vandarius Cohen, one of the freshman outside linebackers, had to burn his red shirt. Another outside linebacker, Jamie Mosley, a guy that got a lot of burn after Christian Miller and Terrell Hall were injured early in the year against Florida State. He got a lot of playing time. And so this just continues to unfold and go downhill. Guys like Keith Holcomb, guys like Hootie Jones in the second. Those are guys that are going to have to step up. The depth is being tested more now than I think I've ever seen it under Nick Saban.
Steve Weaver, to that point about the depth, in the comment section says Bama won with 4th-string linebackers. Depth is awesome. Jeremy Pettis also talking about some of that too, mentioning Dylan Moses, the elite prize recruit from the state of Louisiana, who obviously signs with Alabama for the class 2017. More of an opportunity for him, I guess. But your phrasing here is so important. Yes, Alabama has signed better recruiting classes than anybody in the country over the last 6 or 7 years. But it's one thing to have that depth. It's one thing to need that depth. And right
Yeah.
now it's being tested for Alabama. And unfortunately, you don't quite have the luxury of saying, look how deep we are. All of a sudden now you've taken some of those guys from your bench and you've plugged them in as to key contributors. And this is a challenge for anybody, including the most talented team in the country in the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, and it's not like this is getting spread all around the team. It's not like it's your left tackle and your safety and one of your rush ends. This is coming
That's a
from
really good
all
point.
at the linebacking position. I mean, all of them at the linebacking position. So you look at guys like Keith Holcomb. Is he going to be able to play to the level of Sean Dion Hamilton? And I know that, you look at the LSU game and say, man, we're able to win with those guys. They're able to do really good on defense and, shut down LSU there in the second half. And I'm not worried about LSU in Mississippi State game. Yeah, Alabama's going to be heavily favored in that game. But when you look at Auburn and you look at a possible matchup with Georgia, when you look at the possible playoffs, this one guy being out of place or these two guys being out of place really could spell a lot of trouble for Alabama when you look down the road. They're going to have to find different ways. I don't think it's just next man up when you talk about Sean Dion. I think you go to a little more nickel package, a little more dime package in places, get the best players on the field no matter what position they're playing, and try to kind of contour it that way if you're Nick Saban and looking at game plan.
I like Karen Turner's comment. She says, every string Saban has is equipped to do the job. Bet your sweet self he has them working this week for the future too. And that's obviously true, but Alabama's trying to win a national championship. And listen, injuries are a part of college football. No one's going to deny that. No one's going to over-dramatize Alabama's injuries here. But your point about the fact they are concentrated so much in one key area, that's the thing that makes it trouble for Alabama. Now you start to sort of make these comparisons of, okay, what would it look like against Georgia in the SEC championship? Obviously, Georgia punches its ticket. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Start thinking about some of these college football playoff type matchups. Alabama's still going to have more talent than anyone who would conceivably play in the college football playoff, but I do think a Georgia team that, as of late, has been recruiting very similar to Alabama, all of a sudden the task of beating Georgia is made more difficult here.
Well, I think it's going to be highlighted more actually when they face against Auburn, because here you are at the linebacker position. Think about all the eye candy that Auburn has. Think about all the pre-snap motion. Think about all the jet sweeps and everything you're going to face. A lot of similar things to what Matt Canada and LSU did this past weekend. A lot of that's flashing in front of your face. And yes, physically, when you look at the players that are going to be behind Deshaun Dion Hamilton, they're all probably ready to hit the field. Vendarius Cohen is a very big special athlete. Dylan Moses, another guy who's a very special athlete. But think about how many times a guy like Sean Dion has seen Gus Malzahn's offense, and these other guys have not. They have not seen the jet sweeps. They have not had their eyes kind of stay at home. They have not had to read the quarterback on some of these option plays that you're going to see down the road against a team like Auburn and Mississippi State this weekend. So I agree with you. Yes, the talent's there. They've been recruiting at a very high level, but the ability to kind of step on the field and know what's coming at you and having been there before, I think that's where they're going to experience a little bit of drop-off.
Well, let me move on here to item number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. So while the current SEC West leader, Alabama, was winning by 24-10 margin against LSU over in the East, the SEC East champion, Georgia Bulldogs, doing the same thing, 24-10 against South Carolina. I mentioned East champion. They emerged that way because of an Ole Miss victory at Kentucky on Saturday. So, hey, pretty good day for the number 1 ranked Dogs, right? Beat South Carolina, win the East because you got some help. Just don't tell that to Kirby Smart. And when he was asked about it on Saturday before the Ole Miss Kentucky result became final, he was telling the media and the fans who were listening in that he didn't feel like he had anything to celebrate as of yet.
No, there's not going to be a celebration. I mean, what's there to celebrate? We're going to play Auburn next week. That's what our focus is. We control our destiny, so we're a lot more worried about us than we are Kentucky, Ole Miss.
Then a follow-up question later on is asked to Smart, who, listen, don't you see the significance? It's year 2 for you. Georgia hasn't won the East every single year. Don't you see the significance of all of this? Kirby Smart's still not playing ball.
Yeah, the only thing significant right now is that I get back over there, talk to these recruits, and get ready for Auburn, because that's what I got to do.
So listen, I understand where Kirby's coming from on this, and the truth is the Georgia fans love this idea of keep chopping wood and keep focused on the next opponent. I get that from a coach's standpoint, I get that from a player's standpoint, but here on this show, we don't exactly have to approach it that way. We can sort of take a big picture view of all of this, and for me, this is an incredibly significant thing for Georgia in Smart's second year. It mirrors what Nick Saban, his old boss, did at Alabama in 2008. It mirrors what his predecessor at Georgia, Mark Richt, did in 2002. Both were division winners. In Georgia's case, they went on to actually win the SEC in 2002. And it's not like Georgia's won the East every single year. I understand why Smart downplays this, but I want to call this a major accomplishment for Georgia here. Do you agree?
I completely agree, and I think that's the difference between us talking about it on a Monday and them talking about it Saturday and at press conferences. Because Kirby Smart knows what task lies ahead of him. This is going to be an extremely tough game for them when they face off against Auburn this weekend. But, the retribution tour kind of continues for Kirby Smart in Georgia. When you talk about games they've struggled with in the past and teams they lost to last year and teams going down the stretch, this is another hump they had to get over. I don't care about who it was they were playing when they had to clinch the East. The fact that they clinched the East, to me, gives them something to kind of look back to and say, you know what, we really are a decent team. We really are kind of putting notches on our belt as we move towards the season. And I think he's taking the right mental approach. Like I said, Auburn's going to be a very tough game this weekend, but this is a game that you thought might be a trap game. When you look at Georgia and go down the stretch and go down the schedule, man, South Carolina's going to give them a tough task. Anytime you have Jake Bentley on the field, man, Will Muschamp's good at coaching defense. This was another, ho-hum, steady win in the right direction, and Jake Fromm did some good things as well.
Yeah, and you and I were talking before the show here about the fact that, Auburn actually opens as a slight favorite against Georgia when the betting lines first came out. A lot of action early on kind of sends Georgia in the direction of being now a slight favorite. You've actually swung on both sides of that from one team favored now to the other, and that's actually not the first time that's happened for Georgia this season, which I think is a microcosm of a betting public, even like people who do what we do, talking about college football. There has been this need to sort of rapidly acquaint yourself with just how good Georgia is. You mentioned a revenge tour from games lost last season. Georgia just 8-5 a year ago. The expectation is if you're 8-5 one year, you're going to be something close to that the next year. But the truth is, Kirby Smart has got this team playing in such a way it is nowhere near the team from a season ago. Some of the same players, but not playing with the same kind of mentality. Yeah. Much more sharp, much more focused, much more intense. And I think the betting market for the game against Auburn is a reflection of that people are having to very quickly catch up with. Oh yeah, Georgia's way better than we initially thought.
Yeah, I think it's understandable too, because here Auburn is a team that you think has a really good team. By the way, they do have really good players all over the field. And I mentioned to you a couple times in the offseason, I'm not sure why they lose 4 games, but it felt like Auburn lost 4 games because of Gus Malzahn. But listen, he still is a good game planner. And I think when you match up these two teams together, that Auburn wide receiver core matches up well against Georgia's secondary. And I think that's the reason you see the line being so tight. When Georgia on paper looks like the much, much better team, specifically in the ground game, when you match them up game planning wise, I wouldn't put it past Gus Malzahn to be able to pull a couple tricks out.
Dwayne Tick Coleman says, USCC Live guys laughed at me when I said Georgia would be the best team in football and be number 1. Well, if we did, Dwayne, I apologize. Now, both Mike and I.
You're talking to the wrong guys.
Yeah, I don't know if that was us. But nonetheless, if you call Georgia being number 1, good for you on that. And there are a lot of Georgia fans who are crowing right now with good reason. I mean, I think that this team, and obviously people know I've got a little bit of a bias here. That's obviously a team that I've cared about for a long time. I do Dog Nation daily every single day. But in that role, and hearing from these Georgia fans, like the one thing that you just can't get over is just how much fun Dog fans are having with this ride right now. I think justifiably so. This is a Georgia team that I think really looks pretty good at the moment.
I agree with you, man. We talked all offseason about what would they have at, Jacob Eason, but the run game with the 2 seniors coming back. And then you talk about, all the returners they were getting back from that defense, 10 of 11. I think Trey Smith being the lone guy, or not Trey Smith, sorry. They were losing one defender back in their secondary. And so I think when you look at it and you match it up that way, they're playing as good as you could have possibly hoped for if you're a Georgia fan, which is a great thing. And I think that, obviously they deserve to be the number 1 team. They have continued to check each game and game off, and I think they've done a great job of not looking ahead. They've kind of approached each game individually, and that's a big deal.
Roderick Henderson says Auburn's going to get beat on their offensive line, and that's going to be one of the key issues for that Georgia-Auburn game on Saturday. If you want to look at it a little bit, Auburn obviously had a nice win against Texas A&M on Saturday. How can these two teams disrupt the quarterbacks? Very different situations here. Stidham threw 3 touchdown passes for Auburn on Saturday against Texas A&M. Yeah. He's definitely coming into his own. Jake Fromm still a little less experienced, but having a really good year. And these two really good defenses, how they can bat these two quarterbacks, I think is a big part of that game.
Yeah, listen, Auburn poured it on in the second half against Texas A&M. This was a decently tight game. I don't think Auburn scored until they were 20 minutes into the game. And then all of a sudden Auburn scores, and they score again right before the halftime, and then they block a punt and score another touchdown. So this game did kind of get lopsided towards the second half and into the second half, but Auburn did keep this thing close right around halftime and had some balls bounce their way. They are a very good football team, though.
PJ Sitton back to Georgia says Georgia needs to play one game at a time, play smart, listen to Coach Smart. And obviously that's exactly what they are doing in reference to what Kirby Smart said a moment ago, that not really paying that much attention to the fact that the Dogs did clinch the East Division on Saturday. We appreciate your comments. Georgia fans will take plenty more from you here today on AT&T's SEC Country Live. Before I bring on Mark Burnett and talk some Alabama football with him here today on AT&T SEC Country Live, let me also do item number 3 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and that is a really bad day for Florida against Missouri. You know, Missouri dominates this game really from the word go. Really no fight from the Gators whatsoever in terms of defending Randy Shannon. No fight whatsoever in terms of rallying around the new quarterback, Malik Zaire. This was all Tigers. So much so that the Florida Twitter account decided to have some fun. Many of you who are old enough to remember the movie from the 80s, late 80s, The Naked Gun, tweeting out Leslie Nielsen, nothing to see here, nothing to see here. Eventually they felt bad about that tweet, I guess, forced to delete it. Johnny Townsend, the Florida punter, you kind of see why. He says, in all kinds of weather, question mark, we work too hard to have our own school Twitter bash us. That's what Townsend, the Florida punter, says about the Florida Twitter account for tweeting out the Leslie Nielsen GIF, or is it GIF, however you pronounce it. But nonetheless, that was his reaction to that. Who's in the right, who's in the wrong here? Florida for making light about this, the punter for coming down in a very serious way about what goes on here. I mean, how do you see this?
Well, you know where I'm going to say. I mean, you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to approach it from the player's perspective. And listen, I think it's all fun and games that you run in the social media department upstairs, and that you're out on the field taking pictures at practice while we're hitting each other and bleeding and sweating and killing ourselves. So obviously I'm going to approach it from. It's not a secret to anybody. I'm going to go on Johnny Townsend's side with this and say, you know what? That's really cool that you can put a tweet in a GIF and hit go on your phone, but we're out here trying to win football games. And so it was a bad look from the Florida social media department. I am glad that they responded and deleted that tweet, but I can't say that I blame any Florida fans for having been down on this team when you look at what was going on this weekend in the game. If you'd have showed me this score before the season started, I'd have laughed right in your face. I'd have said, you have lost your mind if you think that Missouri is going to beat Florida by 30 points or 29 points or whatever it came out. It just, as ugly as it could possibly get, Drew Lock did what he wanted to. The Missouri rushing attack did what they wanted to. 227 yards rushing from Missouri. This wasn't an air raid attack.
Yeah.
They took it right to Florida on the ground and were able to make light of it.
Let me defend the Florida tweet here that got deleted, the one with the GIF saying nothing to see here, essentially laughing at what's going on. This kind of thing happens in professional sports all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, these official team Twitter accounts now have become de facto sort of jokes. There's a lot of sarcasm, a lot of jokes. This kind of thing happens in professional sports all the time. When you're losing a game, you just sort of go with it and you just sort of do that thing. So from that standpoint, the Florida tweet's not that far out of line with a lot of what you see in professional sports here. And I think it's the job of the Florida communications department, that Twitter is a part of that, to kind of reflect what fans are thinking. And fans are obviously like, what in the world's going on here? At least in this way, Florida's acknowledging that. The tweet's not for the Florida players, it's for the Florida fans. And from that standpoint, I think the Florida fans probably received this better than Townsend the punter did. And this to me speaks to what has been an ongoing situation where these Florida players, and I think you blame Jim McElwain for this, these Florida players feel incredibly empowered to go public with what they don't like about their own athletic department, their own university. Townsend here kind of taking among himself to say, I have a problem with our team's official Twitter account. There aren't very many SEC schools where a player would do that. Florida seems to be that kind of place. I believe there's a serious cultural problem at Florida that's got to be addressed with the next coach. What are you laughing at? I'm serious.
You gave them a cultural problem because their punter tweeted about a Leslie Nielsen gift. I know what you're saying. It highlights a bigger issue.
How many times have we seen this going on?
Jim McElwain's not even there anymore. I mean, I think it's just a little bit. And listen, what's the key word in what you just said? This happens in professional sports all the time. This doesn't happen in college sports all the time. And so those guys are getting paid to go there. I think what really bothers me about it is, listen, these guys that are in your social media department, they're flying on the plane with you. They're with you in your meeting rooms. They're with you every day down in the weight room filming things. And so I think that makes it a little bit tougher. I think it's one thing when a newspaper writes about you or a fan tweets about you. When those guys are in your building and they're working right down the hall from you and they're talking crap about what's going on the field right down the hall from you, I don't know. I have a little problem with it.
But you have to admit.
I think it would happen. I'm just saying, I know you say it only probably would happen in a couple of schools. I think it would happen at most if that performance had been put on the field and they said that.
Townsend saying what he said reminds me of Chauncey Gardner shooting his mouth off in embarrassing fashion before the Georgia game. Martez Ivey questioning Jim McElwain's assertion they didn't play tough against Michigan. C.C. Jefferson, things that he said. This Florida team this year has felt very free to question what's going on at their university. That's something the next coach, I think, has to address.
I agree with you, and I think that a lot of those players are going to be in for a rude awakening, depending on who does become the head coach down at Florida. I just don't know if the tweet from the punter being upset about the social media department highlights a cultural problem at Florida.
This guy sticks up for every player, even the punters.
I don't know, man.
This guy runs like the college players union.
I don't know if we can say that's a cultural problem at Florida because the punter is mad about a Twitter reference.
That is Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless. DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. And speaking of connected, let's connect it in Tuscaloosa, Alabama right now and say hello to Mark Burnett, who covers the Alabama Crimson Tide for SECCountry.com. And obviously, there was a somber tone, at least briefly, in the Nick Saban press conference today as he talked about a significant series of injuries for Alabama. We know that Sean Dion Hamilton, Mack Wilson, they're going to miss significant time for the Crimson Tide. But, Mark, you've also got to add Minkah Fitzpatrick to that list of injuries as well. He left the LSU game. How much do these injuries set back what Alabama's trying to accomplish this year?
Oh, I mean, the Sean Dion Hamilton injury is huge. He's out for the season. That ends his Alabama career, which is sad to see. Same thing happened to Eddie Jackson, where he wasn't able to enjoy the stretch run of his senior year. And with Hamilton, it sucks because he had a season-ending injury last year when he was playing great football. So, you only wish him the best. Mack Wilson, Nick Saban said he'll be out 4 to 6 weeks. So, potentially he could be a guy who could be coming back if they were to make the playoff. Minkah Fitzpatrick, Nick Saban said he won't practice on Monday, but he should be fine on Tuesday. So it's just a matter of giving him a little bit of rest and then seeing how his body responds going forward.
I read some of the things you wrote after the game for Alabama, 24-10 win against LSU. You were incredibly complimentary of Alabama quarterback Jalen Hurts with some of your words. And I got to ask you, what am I missing here, though? I mean, it's 11 of 23 passing, once again sort of falling below that 50% threshold. Obviously, he doesn't have to win the game here. But when I look at Jalen Hurts, I look at a guy that might have a hard time keeping pace with some of the other quarterbacks he's going to face later on in the season, whether it be an Iron Bowl showdown against Jarrett Stidham. If you want to sort of look ahead to a college football playoff matchup, think about a Baker Mayfield, some of these top quarterbacks in the country. I have a hard time believing that Jalen Hurts is going to be able to match sort of gunslinger for gunslinger with some of those guys, but it sounds like you disagree.
Yeah, I don't think Alabama needs him to be a gunslinger. I just think if you look at that game objectively, Alabama doesn't win that game offensively without Jalen Hurts. I mean, the offensive line didn't play that well. Alabama couldn't run the ball against LSU. Jalen Hurts had to, sort of run for his life at times, extending plays, keeping his eyes down the field. Yeah, if you look at just the raw numbers and say, oh, he was under 50% as a passer, if that's the only way you're going to look at it, then that's probably your opinion. But at the same time, I just think what he does for this team in terms of intangibles, I just think he's an incredible player for Alabama. And you mentioned Jarrett Stidham. I mean, what has he done that's been so impressive? I haven't seen anything from Stidham that makes me go, wow. Baker Mayfield is a great quarterback, but at the same time, he is playing in a Big 12 where they play literally no defense. So we have to factor that in. So
that's certainly a fair point. Let me bring Mike in on this though, because he says, "Hey, completion percentage not what it's all cracked up to be." But I do see Stidham throwing about 65% of his passes for completions. I see a lot less than that, at least in this game, from Jalen Hurts. I mean, am I reading too much into completion percentage to say that what I called at the beginning of the season, I'll still say now? Jarrett Stidham's the better quarterback.
I think you're reading too much. Listen, I was in the stadium and I watched the game, and I'm telling you right now, Jalen Hurts played a really good game.
Okay.
He did. Okay. He played a really good game. And I'm with you, Mark. I think the stats tell a completely different story. Jalen Hurts gave his receivers opportunity to make plays. I mean, he made the throws where only his receivers could get to him. He was hitting guys in the chest, on the numbers. He was hitting guys over the outside shoulders. And some of those younger receivers for Alabama just couldn't make plays. He did some great things with his legs, and I thought he kept Alabama out of trouble in the passing game, which is exactly what he's been asked to do all year. And, Mark, I'll ask you this question because this is one I got a lot, and I had to defend Jalen a lot Saturday night in Tuscaloosa, but this is a question I kept getting. Do you think they needed to develop some kind of package for Tua to come in maybe near the end of the first half or start out the second half of the game and get him on the field somehow?
No, I don't at all. I mean, just think about it like this, guys. Tua is still a true freshman quarterback. So you're telling me that you're going to throw him in a hostile game at the end of the first quarter, at the end of the half, against an LSU team that's hungry on defense. He hasn't had any sort of significant game time. It's a lot different. I'm sure you can attest to this, Mike. It's a lot different playing a defense at the start of a game compared to what it is when a defense is worn down in the fourth quarter. So we don't actually know how he would look if he's playing against a fresh defense. And what would be the point of bringing him in and potentially putting him in a bad situation where, let's say he throws an interception? Are you going to pull him after an interception that kills the kid's confidence and maybe it gets in his head? I think it's a situation where Alabama has a starting quarterback and they have a really good backup, but I just don't think it's the backup's time right now. I think Jalen Hurts, he's 22-1 as a starting quarterback. I mean, it just amazes me that people continue to question this guy despite the fact that all he does is literally just go out and win games.
Mark, it's a strong opinion. We appreciate you sharing with us here today on AT&T SEC Country Live. We love the coverage you provide of the Crimson Tide there each and every day. Obviously, Alabama continues to roll here through the month of November. We'll look forward to reading more from you and talking to you again here on AT&T SEC Country Live again very soon.
All right, thanks, guys.
So here's the question I'd have about Tua Tagovailoa, though. Okay, so if you're not going to play him at all this season, I mean, he's going to be a sophomore next year. Jalen Hurts will just be a junior.
Right.
Are you never going to play Tua Tagovailoa? Because, I mean, if you don't play him right now because he's not experienced, he's not going to be experienced next year either. You're just going to burn his entire eligibility without playing a guy that I think is clearly a better passing quarterback than Jalen Hurts.
Well, listen, I think this is one of those situations where it probably plays itself out. I mean, if you would have asked Georgia going into the year, Jacob Eason was going to take the starts, and they were going to, rely on a strong running game, and Jacob Eason was going to be a good quarterback, and I think he could have done a lot of the things. I think it'd still be at the same spot right now if you're Georgia without Jake Fromm. I think that Jacob Eason would have led them there. So they would have been facing the same issue, but yet Jacob Eason gets hurt. And I'm not so sure that Jalen, with his running style, doesn't get nicked up at some point and Tua becomes a part of the offense. I don't know if that's next year. I don't know if it's down the stretch this year, but that is a lot of the whispers I heard after the game that maybe you do get Tua in certain spots. I don't know the answer to it. I really loved the way Jalen played this past weekend. So, Coach Saban's in a tough situation when you do look at it from that perspective.
All right, we'll have more on Alabama later on the show, including your comments. Make sure you put them in the comment section. For now, though, let's look at the other sideline in the game in Tuscaloosa on Saturday night as we take a look at the LSU Tigers here for item number 4 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I think one of the storylines that you probably saw from a lot of fans on social media, a lot of these people I think were even LSU fans, a certain sense of satisfaction that they gave LSU, or that LSU was able to give Alabama a closer game to kind of fight all the way to the end, even though it ended up being a 2-touchdown victory for the Crimson Tide. An example of this is something Ed Orgeron said in his post-game press conference. I want you to watch this exchange captured on Twitter by one Louisiana reporter with Ed Orgeron, and Orgeron seems to be a big believer that something about this game proves something for LSU. Take a look.
We're coming. We're coming. And we ain't backing down.
Coach, is Miles going to have a chance?
Something tells me that's already a gift. Like, that thing's going to live on the internet for the rest of humanity. And it's a great exchange by the reporter, and a good job for him of capturing that perfect framed, look on Orgeron's face there. Orgeron seemed to believe that LSU game proved something for the Tigers. Do you see it that way?
I do. I really do. And this game, rarely does games turn out exactly how I expected them to happen. I think I sat here the other day and said, I wouldn't be surprised if this was 21-10, 17-10 type game. And it really did turn out that way. I think that Danny Etling played well. I think that the running game looked good. They didn't beat themselves on a lot of facets other than the one interception. They had a few more penalties than Alabama, but I think they played a pretty clean game. I mean, they played. I got done with the game, BA, and I got back to where I was kind of staying for the night, and I kind of looked at it and I thought, man, I don't know how this game got lopsided. LSU outgained Alabama. LSU had more sacks than Alabama. The time of possession was 8 minutes in LSU's favor. They just weren't able to really mount the attack. I said on Twitter Saturday, J.K. Scott, the punter for Alabama, was really the MVP of the game. He continuously flipped the field and kept LSU kind of pinned back, and that really was the story of the game. Alabama capitalizes a couple times in the first quarter, but I think LSU and their team should hold their heads high because I thought they played a very good game.
I think the problem with that, though, is you got to wonder, okay, so who from this game do you say is the future of LSU football in terms of, hey, we're going to build a future victory against Alabama around this guy? I mean, it's not Danny Etling. Darius Guy's going to be on his way to the NFL at a certain point. I mean, who do you build around and say, hey, this is the guy that's going to be the future of LSU? I mean, obviously, I was impressed that LSU was able to compile some of the stats that you talked about, but I don't walk away from this Saturday saying, you know what, the next time those two teams play, I could see LSU winning the game. I don't see it that way. The next time they play, I assume it'll be a little bit like this game was, a little bit like the 2016 game was, where LSU fights hard, keeps it close, and eventually loses. I mean, if anything, I say this half kidding, but they lost by 10 last year. They lost by 14 this year. If anything, the final score deficits are going the wrong direction.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how. And I think I'm going to approach it from a different angle. You're asking about players and who do you point to that really you're building on. I thought the coordinators, I thought Dave Aranda and Matt Canada were as good this past weekend as I've seen them be. I thought Matt Canada allowed Danny Etling time to throw. I thought he moved him around in the pocket. I thought the eye candy was there. They used Russell Gage on some of the speed sweeps continuously. And were able to compile good yardage in doing that. So I think that when you look at the game plan and look at the players that they had that are young, Corey Thompson was a terror coming off the edge for LSU. Arden Key looked back to himself. Darius Geis was able to kind of get some yardage going in the second half. And the freshman offensive lineman that LSU was playing. Think of that situation they were put in. Going against Alabama's defense. They're able to outgain Alabama on the ground playing 3 freshman linemen.
I'll agree with you on Matt Canada. I think that he has made a big impact, made a big difference on this LSU offense. I think he's a really sharp guy, and I love the speed sweep stuff they do with Gage there, one of the wide receivers. But this recruiting cycle, or 2019 at the latest. They've got to find a big-time quarterback. And I don't know that Miles Brennan's that guy. I guess to a certain extent LSU may think he has a chance to be that guy, but they have got to find that quarterback. If Canada's going to sort of put his intelligence and his expertise on display, the future at LSU has got to be finding that big-time quarterback.
I agree.
They've let too many get away, and they have not won some recruiting battles that I think that they really probably should have performed a little better in.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm also wondering if maybe that's a dual threat guy. I think that if you gave Matt Canada a dual threat quarterback and we're able to put a guy like that in his hands down at LSU, then I think the future is sky high. When you look at that offense that he's running, the linemen that obviously they're building on, the depth that they're building up front. And listen, we talked about it before the year started. There was a chance that they could play every freshman in their signing class from this past year, and it definitely looks like that's a possibility.
One quick comment from Tyler Mann, who says LSU is going to build the offense around our offensive line. The defense will be built around Devin White and Greedy Williams. Boy, I tell you what, Devin White is he's a terrific player. When you start thinking about those, in-season honors of the LSU linebacker White, I'm sure he'll be a big part of a lot of that. All right, let me move on here to item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. The exact opposite, potentially, of Alabama LSU may have been Arkansas, struggling with Coastal Carolina. And listen, to go back to what we said about Florida a little earlier, sometimes it's so bad you have to find a way just to sort of make light of it. I thought one Arkansas fan on Twitter did a great job of that, of kind of sort of taking the video of the Arkansas comeback and putting the theme from Titanic underneath it. Listen, this is not a great day for Hogs fans, but when it's commemorated this way, it at least makes it a little funnier. Take a look at this.
Get the ball right here, keep it on the ground.
I don't know why this makes me laugh. Now watch the quarterback. Looking at the stands, kind of giving a little bit of a flex there. As the Hogs, Cole Kelly doing that as the Hogs take a 1-point lead over Coastal Carolina. That's how bad it was. Great job on Twitter kind of commemorating that, though. And don't you love the Cole Kelly flex there as he powers in against the Chanticleers and Joe Moglia, their head coach. So bad, apparently, for Arkansas on Saturday that Pete Thamel from Yahoo Sports wrote this over the weekend that Arkansas coach Brett Bielema likely sealed his fate on Saturday by narrowly beating woeful Coastal Carolina. This was the night that all Arkansas fans lost all hope. I think that Thamel's probably right about that. Now, I was under the impression, this is not a report, this was just my opinion, I was under the impression that Bielema had probably already sort of sealed his fate, but you can't bring the guy back now.
No.
I mean, the coaching search needs to begin, and a lot of these guys, Tennessee's the same way. They're going to apparently let this guy stay employed till the end of the season and then try to scramble together and sort of put together a signing class over the course of a couple weeks. That doesn't make any sense to me, but there's no way that Bielema can come back now.
Well, I think there is a way, because I think Arkansas is going to, be very careful in what they do in moving him out, because so many coaching jobs will be open. So I think you have to be careful about what you do at Arkansas. But I think there's definitely – I think he's as good as gone. I'm agreeing with you, but I think there's a little bit more blowback than probably we give credit to. I think when you look at the game, though, and you match up some of the statistics, they were better on third down. They had the same number of first down. This was not a fluky game by Coastal Carolina. And this is, by the way, not a good team. This Coastal Carolina team is
not a good FCS.
They are 1-8 team. So I mean, I think that's why I was kind of laughing about Cole Kelly kind of flexing. Giving the whole bicep look when you were down with 10 minutes left by 2 touchdowns to Coastal Carolina and a bad FCS team.
Yeah.
So it is a bad look. It's a bad look for Brett Bielema. I'm sure that he was kind of stunned by what was going on in the game, but they did pull it out in the end. So you have to give them just a tiny sliver of credit.
So here's why I would say if I was Arkansas, I wouldn't be afraid of the other jobs that are going to be open in the SEC. Because if Arkansas wanted to, it could pay anything and match anybody else's salary. You got the Walmart money. You got Jerry Jones. You got the Glass family that owns the Kansas City Royals. All of those families are boosters within that kind of Arkansas community. There's no shortage of money.
Yep.
That's the first thing. But here's the second thing. Arkansas is so far to the west of the geographic center of the SEC that for the most part, Florida and Tennessee are looking for different coaches than what Arkansas would be looking for. If we assume for a moment that the rumors of Arkansas being involved for Kevin Sumlin or involved for Gus Malzahn, if we assume that they're just rumors, that Arkansas is not actually going to take another SEC coach, which they might, but let's just assume for a moment they don't. The next group of candidates for Arkansas are not really the same names that Florida or Tennessee would be considering. The Florida job's already open. The Tennessee job might be open. You start thinking about like a Chad Morris from SMU or places like that. Guys who have those recruiting ties to the state of Texas. That's who Arkansas has to go after. That's not an important part for the Tennessee job, the Florida job. Florida's open, Tennessee's not, once again I'll say. But the Arkansas pool of candidates is just a different pool.
I think it is. I think when you compare them to Tennessee and Florida, yes, it definitely is. But, I mean, we could look at Texas A&M searching for a head coach. We could look at Auburn searching for a head coach. Ole Miss will be searching for a head coach. Maybe Mississippi State searching for a head coach. And then you throw Missouri, who is geographically close to Arkansas as well. Maybe not this year. Maybe Barry Odom saved his job this past weekend, but in the next couple of years, they could be looking for a head coach. And so I think when you do kind of put it in the SEC West and kind of gel all those teams together, Arkansas is mid to lower rung on some of those battles. Yes, they're probably going to get in over an Ole Miss job right now, but it is tough when you start to line up 6, 7 openings in the SEC. If Arkansas really is at the top of that rung, I think they have to be careful is all I'm saying.
Dennis Smith in the comment section reflecting something you had said, why don't the SEC teams that are firing their coaches work on swaps? Sumlin goes to Tennessee, Butch Jones goes to Ole Miss, McElwain to Arkansas, Brett Bielema to Florida, just to make this up for grabs. The truth is, even though Dennis jokes about that, I mean, there has been some talk that Arkansas would be looking to a Gus Malzahn, who Auburn may not be happy with, depending on how the month of November goes. Kevin Sumlin, who Texas A&M almost for sure isn't happy with. And I believe that Sumlin and Malzahn both would be upgrades for Arkansas.
Yes.
I don't know that any of these other SEC teams are looking to hire someone else as coach, but if Arkansas could get a Sumlin or a Malzahn, which we talked about on Thursday, I think that's actually a pretty big win for Arkansas at that point.
I completely agree. I think you have to look at an offensive guru when you're Arkansas looking for a head coach, because the best years they've had, listen, when you had Darren McFadden run the Wildcat, that was a pretty good year for Arkansas. And then when you had Bob Petrino as the coach, when you lined him up and he was able to do things different offensively, that's when Arkansas has had their best years. So you do try to get that Sumlin, Malzahn type of head coach into Arkansas and hope you can hire a good defensive coordinator.
We'll get Alex Hickey. We'll talk some LSU Tigers with him coming up in just a couple of minutes. Before that, though, let me do item number 6 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. To go back to Alabama and LSU for a moment, Alabama running back Bo Scarborough, well, he looks at the 24-10 win for the Crimson Tide, and Scarborough did not like everything that he saw necessarily from this game. In fact, after the game, he had some pretty pointed remarks. Take a listen to Alabama star running back Bo Scarborough.
I don't think that was, Alabama football. I think, we should have been more prepared. I think we could have did a way much better job than we did. A lot of minor errors, a lot of mistakes that we got to fix.
So that's Scarborough there, not all that happy with what he saw.
Yeah.
Talking about mental errors, saying this is not Alabama football. Is this just a guy taking after Nick Saban who's going to be hard on his team the way that Saban we think of as being hard on Alabama? Or does Scarborough have a point about what he saw on Saturday night?
He kind of falls back in line with everything I was saying. I thought LSU kind of, in a lot of instances, outplayed what Alabama was trying to do. I don't think you're ever going to out-Alabama when you talk about running between the tackles, and that's probably what Bo Scarborough's really referring to. And they didn't really try to. When you look at some of the stats, Alabama didn't put the ball in the running back's hands a ton. I mean, Damian Harris only a handful of carries. I think Bo Scarborough had 10 for maybe 40 yards, something in that range. So this wasn't your prototypical Brian Dable, hey, we're going to run it up the middle. This is not how they approached Vanderbilt or Ole Miss, some of the teams they saw early in the year. LSU stacked the box with good players. That's the difference. LSU has a good front seven. The depth might not be there, but Christian Lacouture, Shard Lawrence, Arden Key, Corey Thompson, Devin White, I mean, you can name them. They are good players up front. So that really kept Bama from playing that Bama-style ball that Bo's talking about.
It's so funny you bring this up because obviously there's some similarities between Georgia and Alabama right now, given the fact that Kirby Smart coached at Alabama and trying to do some of that at Georgia right now. And I do the Dixie Vodka postgame show, postgame on our Dog Nation Facebook page, and some people were kind of talking about what you were saying that, hey, you're stacking the box against Georgia, or in this case, Alabama, and some fans were saying, yeah, but you still got to be able to run it. The truth is, that'd be a dumb thing to do, right? Yeah. I mean, if you see the box completely loaded up, at that point in time, you've got to either RPO out of it, or you're just going to simply call a different play coming out of the huddle or coming from the sideline to do something else. And what Georgia did on Saturday, a little bit against South Carolina, which we'll talk more about in a moment, may be a little bit of the same thing for Alabama, which is, listen, if you were going to sell out completely to stop the run, then only a fool at that point in time would just keep cramming it up in there, because you're not playing Coastal Carolina, you are playing LSU.
Yeah, and the Darius Geis comments did kind of come in the back of my head when I saw what Dave Aranda was doing, 8 and 9 guys in the box for LSU, and I thought, well, LSU's scared today too, because they're stacking the box, and they're making Jalen Hurts throw, doing the same thing that Nick Saban's been doing to this team for quite some time. And I thought they did a good job of it. And you're right. I mean, there are certain instances where you are going to run against an 8, 9, 10-man box. When you get into that 4-minute mode at the end of the game, or you're trying to take the air out of the ball, getting 3-4 yards at a time is a big deal when you're playing a lesser opponent. LSU did not allow them to do that. And Brian Daboll, when you look at the second second half really kind of opened up some of the passing game and told Jalen to go get some yards with his legs because he knew that LSU was loading the box. And listen, we're not going to be hard-headed here. We're going to kind of pull the ball out and make some plays downfield. And I thought when they needed to, they did that, and it was the difference in the game.
Mabel Parker says, Tigers spanked that Bama butt, softened them up for Georgia, and exposed them. As with a young, inexperienced Tigers team, they gave Bama a good whooping. Let me finish this. This is pretty good. Just gave Alabama a whooping. It was Alabama football. They just hadn't played a real good team yet until LSU. But let me ask you about that. I mean, Alabama is number 2 in the college football playoff rankings. They'll come out again tomorrow. My assumption is Alabama stays at number 2. And if you ask the committee why Alabama's at number 2, is because they'd say Alabama hasn't proven anything yet. Did Alabama prove something positive for you against LSU? Did they take another step towards being a national championship team? Did they add to their resume?
I think that's a really good question, and I think for me, the concept of Nick Saban football continues to win games. And I can't tell you how many times I've said it on the show. Alabama's best attribute is that they don't beat themselves. The best way they win games is that they don't beat themselves. And you didn't see any turnovers. I think they had maybe 1 penalty all night from Alabama, and the punting game and special teams were very good. And that continues to be the recipe. Jalen not throwing the ball over, trying to win the time of possession, which didn't work out this weekend, and not getting penalties. And so that brand, that was Alabama football. Now, they are going to run up against a team later in the year that they're going to have to win the game with themselves. I think when you look at the injuries and look at some of the things they've done, it will be very tough. I'm not ready to say that Alabama runs the table and goes 15-0. I think they're going to run up against some very good teams, and that's going to have to play out on the field.
That is Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. All right, we're going to try to catch up with Alex Hickey. We'll talk some LSU with him hopefully in a couple of minutes. In between now and then, though, let's move on to item number 7 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And the question that I just asked you about Alabama, I want to ask you a version of that about Georgia after its 24-10 win against South Carolina on Saturday. Now, when the game was over and Kirby Smart was asked to give his assessment of what went down, he was actually pretty impressed with what he saw from his team, despite the fact that Georgia didn't cover the point spread from a Las Vegas standpoint. Here's how Kirby described what Georgia was able to do against South Carolina.
That was a grind-like, workman-like win. That's a good football team. I really worried that our kids wouldn't respect or listen to us as coaches because we watched the tape, we know, and they did. They had a really good week of practice, physical week, and it's easy to overlook South Carolina because of the way we played them last year, but South Carolina has a really good football team. They're physical. Their quarterback is a really good player who's going to be around for a while, and they've got big wideouts that are tough to match up with. And up front, defensively, they've done a great job of improving their front. They've got really good size. So they did a good job against us, and our kids kept chopping. And it was a very workmanlike win, and I'm proud of the way we played.
So we think about Kirby Smart as being a little bit of a perfectionist. In that case, though, he was actually pretty happy with what he got from his team on Saturday, and I find myself wanting to agree with him. This was not a perfect game from Georgia, but perfect seasons don't require 12 perfect games. We don't know yet that Georgia is going to have a perfect season, but I actually thought Georgia did take a step on Saturday. They responded to sort of being pushed back physically. I thought Jake Fromm had a pretty good day for the Dogs, and I thought this was the kind of day that did take a step towards validating Georgia's number 1. Do you agree with that?
I agree with you, and I think it is kind of eerie, how similar these two games were for Alabama and Georgia.
Same score,
and you kind of had that same workmanlike attitude where kind of fans look at the spreads at 21.5 for Alabama, 24 for Georgia, and expect you to just blow these teams out. And I said this a bunch Saturday. These spreads, this is not how much you're supposed to win by. These spreads are trying to stir up gamblers. These spreads are trying to get people to throw money on the game. So that's not really something you're going to kind of wages to. I will say this about Georgia in comparison to Alabama. Georgia had the ball for 38 minutes and 22 seconds. That is not what Alabama did. Alabama had it for 26 minutes. So that is the Georgia style of football. That is exactly what you want if you are Georgia. Pound the running game, make plays with Jake Fromm when you have to, and take over with your front seven, and that's exactly what they were able to do. And I think that's why Kirby Smart seemed very content with how things happened. Yes, it was a 24-10 game, but when you look at some of the things on the outside, total yards 438 to 270, that was the Georgia brand of football. That's the blueprint for them right now.
And, some Georgia fans were nervous in the first half. It was only 14-7 at the half. But what I was telling some people is, listen, whatever the anatomy of an upset is, whatever the recipe for an upset is, it requires more than rushing for 50 yards, which is all South Carolina did. They only had 11 yards rushing in the first half or something along those lines. You're just simply not going to beat Georgia if you're not running the football. Now, Bentley, like Drew Lock the other day, the Missouri quarterback, some of the quarterbacks this season, you can have the Georgia secondary. You can get to that group, and if you can expose them a little bit. But you're not beating Georgia if you can't run the football. That's why an Alabama game for Georgia is potentially dangerous. Auburn this week could be potentially dangerous.
Yeah.
Those teams are capable of running the football, but you're not going to beat Georgia if you can't run it.
No, I agree with you. And if I'm Alabama coach Nick Saban and I'm sitting back there and watching, what you could possibly play in Auburn and then possibly play in Georgia in the SEC championship game, I am excited that those two teams are playing before we get to them, because I think you're going to learn a lot about both of those teams this weekend and the way they match up and what they try to do each other. Some of the different looks you're going to find from. Listen, when you talk about the way Kirby Smart's going to attack this Auburn offense, there possibly is a blueprint there for Nick Saban to kind of follow over and do it a couple of weeks later.
That's really interesting. I want to make a point about South Carolina in a moment. Let me just say one more thing about this, about Georgia before we get there. When I look at the national landscape, Ohio State loses again on Saturday. I still think that's a good team. They just happen to have 2 losses right now. Penn State loses again. Yeah. Oklahoma wins, but it's like a million points scored there.
38-31 at halftime.
I mean, it's crazy. I don't see a national team. I'm going to say Alabama for sure, but that's an SEC team. I really don't see a national team right now that has a resume that comes close to doing what Georgia's going to do, unless you want to say Clemson, who has the loss and Georgia doesn't, and Clemson did not lose to a particularly good team in Syracuse. Yeah. Do you see a national team that makes a challenge to Georgia right now in terms of a resume?
I don't know. I think when you look at it from a resume, when obviously with 3 weeks left in the season, I think it's the 2 SEC teams and everybody else. When you ask me, I think that any given Saturday, we can talk about it. Clemson has the ability to really game plan and really match up well with a lot of these different teams. I think you're going to see that an Oklahoma team that's going to give somebody fits. And Notre Dame, we saw Notre Dame go toe-to-toe with Georgia and lose by a point, and so that's kind of a quality loss for them. But the more we move through the season, and I won't get into this a ton right now, I think the Big Ten probably played themselves out of a playoff spot this week. I think if Notre Dame stumbles against Miami, they're probably out of the playoff discussion. And I think there's a bigger opportunity than there ever has been for Bama and Georgia to both get in.
I think that's really interesting to think about. One more point here about this Georgia-South Carolina game. Y'all, I think South Carolina's got a really bright future. And some of y'all thought I was pulling your leg last week when I said Florida, the best thing they could do was rehire Will Muschamp. He's building something in South Carolina. They're going to beat Florida this week. He's just doing a good job of recruiting. I think South Carolina's record was at 6-3 now. That to me is not a fluke. They're going to have a nice record at the end of the season. I think South Carolina is, for the next 2 or 3 years, it's a much more legitimate threat to Georgia in the East than either Tennessee or Florida.
I said it on the show last week. When you look at South Carolina's program, when you look at the young guys they have in the defensive front 4 and front 7, mixed with Jake Bentley at quarterback, I think that anything's possible. I think they've got to find some of those grinders on the offensive line, some of those guys that can go up against top-flight competition and really be able to chug out the rushing yards. When you look at the rushing yards, I think 45 for South Carolina's pack. Not going to get it done. But when Will Muschamp does find that offensive line that he needs and the offensive line coach and gets those things moving forward, they are going to be an extremely dangerous team for years to come.
All right, item number 8 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. A third SEC game finished the 24-10 final on Saturday. This one probably not quite as pleasing for the home team, though. Vols do beat the Golden Eagles of Southern Miss by that final score, but not without a little bit of controversy here. Take a look at the reaction of the Southern Miss coach after one of his players is called for leaping on a Tennessee field goal attempt, and listen to a pretty curious comment from one of the broadcasters in the game here. This was captured on Twitter here. I think this leads to a larger conversation about what may have happened in Knoxville on Saturday. Take a look at this.
Keeping an eye on those guys.
I don't see how that's a penalty. They put that rule in, more of an emphasis on that rule this year because guys were jumping over.
Remember Zach Cunningham jumped and blocked one.
And Jay Hobson just saw it, and he draws 4 flags. He is all the way out to midfield. And I don't blame him for being upset about this one.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him for being upset in the discrepancy of fouls against his team versus the home team tonight.
And it's really that last part, and that's all the video we probably need to see. But the broadcaster in that game saying, don't blame him for being upset about that. And if you don't know, you're not allowed to leap into the pile on a blocked field goal attempt. It's the way of sort of legislating anything that might be dangerous out of football, which is probably a different topic for a different day. But nonetheless, that's what the call was initially supposed to be. But how about the officials there saying they thought that Southern Mississippi had been on the wrong end of a few of those calls in that game on Saturday? I mean, do the Eagles have a gripe here?
I think they definitely do. I think that was just a small part of it. When you look at the penalties, 14 for 120 yards for Southern Miss, 3 for 29 for Tennessee. By the way, this was not a good win for Tennessee. Tennessee looked bad in this game. When you look at some of the yardage totals, 279 to 210, 17 first down to Tennessee's 14. Southern Miss was 7 of 20 on third down, opposed to 2 of 13 for Tennessee. I mean, it was Southern Miss should have won the game. It was the penalties that really took them out of it. And I think you saw the head coach right there finally saying, you know what, this is a non-conference game. I have nothing to lose. I'm going out there to make a statement that my team should have been in this game.
Listen, good for him. You know, I'm all for sportsmanship. I'm all for that kind of stuff. But there's also a place to kind of go out there and back up your team and have their back a little bit. And you know what? It's an automatic penalty for coming on the field now. I think he got 4 personal fouls for going all the way out there, but they're at the goal line anyway. How about you stick up and support your team at that point in time? In that case, I actually like what the guy did.
That's one of the worst calls I've ever seen. I mean, we talk about 2 referees literally standing next to this guy as he jumps up in the air and puts his hands up and lands back down on his feet, and yet the flags started flying everywhere. I thought it was a terrible look for the officials more than anything.
Steve Weaver says the Red Elephant Club paid the refs to keep Butch Jones in Tennessee. I don't know about that. Trod Duke says, LOL, can you say rigged? Nicole Howe says he jumped. He didn't jump in. And listen, I hate to take it down this road, but this is one of the reasons why I don't like these kinds of rules. These kinds of things that are supposed to sort of prevent injuries in football. I mean, listen, injuries to a certain extent can't be prevented in any sport. I know that there's a lot of people get hurt in football because it's a physical game, and it's a reason why guys like me didn't play the thing growing up. But you know, these kind of dumb, you know, sort of judgment call rules, you're going to get these sort of dumb calls because of the fact that the rule itself is kind of dumb.
It drives me crazy when they put in rules like this. This is more public perception than anything. No guy probably has ever gotten hurt jumping to block a field goal. Right. You just never see it, and yet they put in these stupid rules that these guys are dropping these flags on for the public perception to make themselves feel better, when in turn it really does nothing. All it does is hurt the game and hurt the perception of the officials, and has a bad look when you look at the coach running on the field saying, you guys are idiots.
Let me squeeze in one more thing on this game because we talked about this last week. So Will McBride, now you brought this up. I didn't think this would ever happen, but McBride, the backup quarterback for Tennessee, does play on Saturday. Burns his red shirt for 8 pass attempts because of a Garantano injury there in the first half. I mean, how dumb is this from Butch Jones?
It makes me sick. It makes me sick for Will McBride. And my big thing last week was if Jarrett Garantano's helmet comes off, then run the Wildcat for a player, put somebody else in. But he got injured. So I see it a little bit differently, but not a lot differently. Because people are like, oh, well, that's the only option you have. There's 7 other quarterbacks on the sideline. This is a home non-conference game for Tennessee. They're dressing out 120 players. You got 1 million quarterbacks. We used to have like 7 quarterbacks at a time. If not, I mean, think about if Will McBride got hurt. What are you going to do? You're going to go to Wildcat? I think it's insane to me that this guy got 3 plays in and burned his red shirt, and it just is a complete black eye for me for Butch Jones. Continues to go down this path week in and week out.
We did not have time to put this in today's show. There's so much stuff from this weekend. We'll have to do this probably tomorrow. But McBride's mom, I don't know if you saw this or not, but McBride's mom had a pretty interesting social media reaction to him going in the game. We'll sort of talk about that at some point this week here on AT&T SEC Country Live. For now, though, let's move on to item number 9 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And speaking of SEC coaches who may be done, that may be the case for Kevin Sumlin at Texas A&M. We'll show you some of what's been reported here, including the read optional Ollie Conley and Trey Wallace kind of weighing in on this, that he's been counting down the days to his departure from Aggieland after the Auburn loss on Saturday. That's even more true now, I guess, for close to 2 years now. Sources at multiple levels of the football administration have been told to prepare for a 2018 season without Sumlin, including notifying the communications department to prepare its strategy. Draft statements at the conclusion of the season. Once again, that's Ollie Conley, Trey Wallace from the Read Optional. Football Scoop also having its own, at least similar report on that. We'll show you what one of their writers had to say about that as well. A&M hasn't beaten an SEC West opponent at home in 763 days. Change is coming, but sources tell Football Scoop not to look for A&M to make a move before the end of the season unless something unforeseen were to occur. So Doug Samuels, Football Scoop, the folks over at the Read Optional, essentially saying the same thing, that the Auburn loss may be the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, and Kevin Sumlin is done. Is that the right move for the Aggies?
I think it is. I mean, we talked before the season, and could the Texas A&M fans deal with another season, kind of that that mediocre 8-win season like they have for the last couple of years? And I think that's exactly what they're staring in the face. They're sitting at 5-4 now, and they were outplayed at times. It ended up being a 15-point loss, but when you look at how things really turned out on the field, this game in the second half to me wasn't questionable. I think that they played a very good first half and kept it close, but after the block punt right before halftime, I thought Auburn really took off from then, and A&M scores kind of a garbage late touchdown. This just tells me everything you know about Kevin Sumlin. I really feel that way. They get the loss to Mississippi State last week. Really needed to beat Auburn. We said it was a loser leaves town match.
Right.
Didn't happen in Kevin Sumlin's favor.
I think Scott McFadden's got a really good point in the comment section, though. He says, where are all these replacement coaches supposed to come from?
I know.
And that is a very simple question, but it's true. I mean, there is not a lot of white knights riding in on stallions here to save this thing. I mean, Tennessee's got its John Gruden they can hold out hope for. if that's a savior, you can debate that amongst yourself. But the rest of these programs don't even have that name out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea who Florida's going to hire. I have no idea who Texas A&M would hire. I really don't know who like the savior coach for these programs is supposed to be. I agree with the questioner in the comment section. I don't know that guy's necessarily out there.
Yeah, I understand it, and I agree with you. And I think that, a lot of times in the SEC West here, at least recently, we've, a lot of universities look at what Coach Saban and now what Coach Smart are doing at Georgia and say, why can't we do that? And there's just not a lot of those guys sitting around. You can't, you're getting rid of a guy like Les Miles. And the Mark Richt thing worked out, but you get rid of a guy like Mark Richt, and then you get rid of a guy like Tommy Tuberville a bunch of years ago back at Auburn, and some quality coaches that have exited this league because of what the powers at the top have been doing. And I think that when you look around and you look at Mike Norvell or some of these other coaching names that are coming up, Scott Frost, I don't know that those guys are any better than the ones that are there, but I kind of applaud these universities for not being complacent and saying, you know what, we're going to take our shot at some point.
All right, can we talk about something that happened at a football game that's got nothing to do with football?
I knew this was coming.
Let's do that in a moment. It's AT&T SEC Country Live. That's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. AT&T's SEC Country Live. Of course, AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless Direct TV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. So this is the subject of item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So this gal, we'll show you the video here. I don't know if I respect her for just having like the courage of her conviction or what, but take a look at this. So she's smoking her cigarette there in Bryant-Denny Stadium. When the police comes, she's not putting this thing down. She holds it up. The police officer's upset here. He gets his handcuffs. She's shocked. And now he's going to drag her out of the stadium. Look at the look on her face. This is eerily reminiscent of that thing that happened on the United Airlines flight the other day when that guy got dragged off, except I think that was a hoax on his part. And this
look at the
LSU
fan in front of him helping him.
Helping and kind of shove her out
like,
the way there.
Get your hand off my seat. Get out of here.
So here's the thing. I don't know what you're supposed to do here, but I sort of feel like, and listen, nobody backs the blue more than me, but I sort of feel like if you get into a situation where you're dragging what appears to be an elderly lady on the ground
that's a bad look.
out of the aisle, I sort of feel like that's a bad look. I sort of feel like you got to do something to diffuse the situation so you're not dragging her out on her behind.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is either. I've never taken the tactical classes that police go through. It is a little bit of a bad look. But listen, she disrespected the cop. She puts a cigarette in his face, basically laughs at him. I don't know what he's supposed to do.
I mean,
you can tell all the people sitting around are like, please get this lady out of here. She's drunk and she's smoking, and it's a slap.
Like, who has the courage to do this stuff?
And by the way, I'm not even looking at the comment section, but before y'all even go on Alabama fans, because I know it's going to be happening, I would just challenge any other fan base to go dumb, blank, whatever your university is, dumb Georgia fan, and type that in YouTube. I guarantee you'll find a ton of stuff just
I'm not even going to go down the Alabama route on this because there's a fan from every school that
I just know it's there. I'm not even looking at it, but I know it's there.
The thing I'm more fascinated with, who has the courage to look at a cop and say, no, I'm not going to put my cigarette. It's like the Sharon Stone line Basic Instinct. We going to arrest me for smoking? I mean, you got to give her some credit, I guess, for like, hey, I'm a smoker and I'm proud of it.
I should have thought about this before the show, but did you see the video from the Miami game where the lady's getting towed out by 3 cops? And the guy? It's just, I don't know. I don't know where these people think that things are okay like this, but you wouldn't see me doing
There was enough stuff for 3 shows today. Champions of Life, actual regular topics. It was all there for you this week. Speaking of Champions of Life, we've got a good one we'll do here in just a moment. Something that I feel like we could be potentially guilty of at a certain point in time. I'll show that to you coming up in just a moment for our Champion of Life. Before we get to that, though, I mentioned AT&T, proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. And speaking of AT&T, let's do our AT&T look ahead here and take a look at this upcoming Saturday. Big weekend in the SEC. Arkansas, LSU, as LSU tries to bounce back after the loss to Alabama. Ole Miss hosting Louisiana after getting a win against Kentucky, sealing the deal for Georgia in the East. Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, Auburn, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Mississippi State, a better game than you might think. The Lobos of New Mexico go to Texas A&M, and then Tennessee at Missouri as Missouri goes on its tour of just maybe bludgeoning some of these SEC East teams. Kind of an interesting weekend coming up in the SEC.
And Alabama and Georgia continue to kind of mirror each other with some of the games they're playing. I think that both are up for a tough task this weekend. Alabama's probably going to be favored big over Missouri. I think the line's sitting there at 15 or 16. I'm sorry, Mississippi State. But I think all eyes, I think from everybody watching the show, will be glued to that Auburn-Georgia game to see what exactly happens in that game. Because we've pointed to Auburn for probably a month or two now as the biggest task facing Georgia since Notre Dame.
All right, here on AT&T SEC Country Live, just like Tennessee coach Butch Jones is looking for champions of life, well, we're looking for him here in our program too. And today, As I said, it comes from a segment on TV that I think Mike and I both could have been guilty of here. Take a look at what happened during one ACC broadcast. They go back to the studio for a quick wrap-up of what happened in another game and a preview of another game. But listen to how the two analysts are not on the same page as the host. Mike and I occasionally not listening to each other? Maybe so, but hopefully not as bad as this. Take a look.
Let's check in with Katie and Charlotte, see what's coming up at halftime.
Well, coming up on our PNC Investments halftime, we're going to report, we're going to take a look at those two big ACC matchups, starting with NC State Clemson, Dan.
Listen, if you like quarterback play, this game has two of the best young newcomers in this conference. Josh Jackson from Virginia Tech, Malik Rozier from Miami. And they have comparable numbers. Which one's going to make mistakes?
So she tries to get it back here. Watch this.
What about NC State?
Big games, a lot of times it comes down to special teams. Usually you think that's Virginia Tech's favor, but it's Miami's Braxton Berrios, 6th in the nation in punt returns.
This poor gal just wants to talk about the what game? The NC State Clemson game. That's the game she wants to talk about. Tommy Bowden coached at Clemson, but they are all about talking about Miami, Virginia Tech.
Listen, I saw something similar to this. I was watching the Auburn Texas A&M game from this past weekend, and some of you guys might have seen this. The Aflac trivia question was, when was the last time the SEC East won the SEC championship game? The analyst from ESPN, he guesses that it was Clemson. That it was Auburn and Cam Newton in 2010.
That's not good.
He said, I think it was Auburn and Cam Newton. I was like, dude, what? Like, what? How long have you been calling SEC games that you guessed Auburn was the last SEC East champion?
So listen, we're all capable of the bad moments every now and then. When I start looking at these comments, I don't probably listen to Mike as well as I should sometime anyway. All right, but anyway, y'all subscribe to the podcast. It's there for you in iTunes. You can also give us a rating and a review. Share the show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every day here on AT&T SEC Country Live. We'll see you again at 3 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow for another episode. It's a big week coming up at the SEC. We'll talk about it all tomorrow right here on AT&T SEC Country Live.